Good morning. Welcome back to Professional Insights brought to you by the National Referral Network, where we talk to licensed professionals about real issues that impact your life and talk about how a coordinated financial plan brings clarity so you know what direction you're moving. And this morning, we're talking about a topic very few of us want to talk about, but we need to. It currently affects, which I found out in doing this research, 7 million Americans. And we're talking about cognitive decline. I can't even pronounce it.
Yeah.
Maybe I've got cognitive decline. But this morning we're talking with Jeff Marsocci, known as the Plain English Attorney, helping bring clarity to estate planning. He's got a YouTube channel. That link is below. And before we get going, make sure to hit that subscribe and notification bell so you don't miss an episode. Good morning, Jeff. How are you?
Good morning. How are you doing today?
I'm excited. On
All
a
right.
personal note, this is kind of near to me. My dad just passed away from not from cognitive decline, but he had dementia, and so this is a very
Okay.
important topic because we know about cognitive decline, Jeff. But
hmm
why is it important to understand cognitive decline when it comes to somebody's assets?
Well, okay. When someone has cognitive decline, they may do something that seems like a good idea at the time. And then afterwards, on reflection, it's not a great idea. And it may even take the form of the kids or someone important saying, "What did you do? Oh my gosh, this is terrible." Just to give a case, several years ago, there was a gentleman. He saw something on a news station, kind of went into a little bit of a mini panic, called up the broker, sell all of this stock.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, you're going to have capital gains. I don't care, sell the stock. The next morning, his daughter comes in and she get reads through the email because she was already helping him with the bills. It's like, wait a minute, why'd you sell this stock? And suddenly there's all these capital gains taxes. It's like, did I sell that stock? And he
Oh,
just didn't know. And so one of the things we did is we ended up putting everything that we could in a revocable living trust. The daughter became the trustee to oversee that, not dad. And so now those assets ended up being a lot more protected from things like that.
but
Now,
Jeff, we get.
yeah,
But look, we
yeah.
we forget things, right? As we get older, like, good heavens,
Yeah.
I forget where my keys are now, and I'm not that old, right? But how do we
Yeah.
determine if a loved one is going down this path? Now, with going through with this with my dad and doing some research, like, we start kind in our brains, depending on all kinds of
hmm
variables, like, it's as early as 40s that we start developing. Now, it doesn't manifest until later. But
Right.
how do we determine on a law on because you're an attorney, on the law
Right.
side of things, how do you determine if somebody has hit that threshold that's of concern?
Well, okay, we've got some different thresholds. There's okay, the threshold of concern is anytime that there's an action taken. Look, I wander into a room, I forget why I went there.
Right?
But I'm not losing tens of thousands of dollars in a
Okay.
transaction because I went into that room. But those are early warning signs. Now, some of the ways that we can look for things like very early stages dementia, this is a very common thing that I've gotten in some trainings. If the kids come home for Thanksgiving or Christmas, or they're visiting and it's several months, they're not with them all the time. There's the potato story. Open up the pantry and all of these potatoes are in there, like 100 pounds of
Mhm.
potatoes. What's been happening is mom or dad's going to the grocery store. They've got on their list, oh, I need to get potatoes. And they get a bag of potatoes, they get back, and oh, there's already a bag of potatoes.
Gotcha.
And then they go 3 or 4 days later and they come back. So you see that stuff piling up. You also see that there are bills that are sitting on the table and they're 2, 3 months old. What's happening is they're getting to the bills, they're looking through it, and they're getting frustrated and saying, I'll come back to it later. But there's always this desire to not have to be dependent on other people. That's just the way we are. And one thing that I have also found is people have very good ways of covering that they're forgetful. So, what can we do? Well, look for those warning signs. But then you have to immediately approach the planning end. And it doesn't have to be wholesale change everything, take away all their power and ability to be an independent human being, because that decline doesn't work like that. It's in small bits and pieces. It can be as solid as, look, we're just going to start out. We need to do some planning just in case I'm doing this type of planning, mom and
Yeah.
dad. You should also put into place a solid, durable general power of attorney so that I can assist you if you need that help. We
Yeah.
need to put in place a healthcare power of attorney. So you start there. And then it's like, well, I don't know if you've had any experience going through probate. It's a really difficult thing for probate. Let's set up a revocable living trust and move the main assets in there so it doesn't have to go through probate. And it's not just if you die that it goes through that court system. If you become incapacitated, anything that's in your name ends up going through this conservatorship process and a guardianship process, and you have to report to the court. Let's try to avoid it on that end. But it's a revocable trust. You're still the trustor and the trustee, mom or dad. You still control everything.
But Jeff,
But now,
that's a it's a it's a conversation, and I guess where I'm getting to, where my head's going with, is that my dad paid an extra mortgage payment, which was that first sign, right? Um, but it's still a very hard conversation to have because there's that independent side of it, and right,
yeah,
that's a whole different conversation. But when should you start having these conversations? I'm assuming it's not this. It's not when you first see the sign. Like, it's well before
yeah.
that, so we're not getting into this independence. Is that
Well, okay. Again, these are small warning signs. Like I said, finding 100 pounds of potatoes in the pantry isn't the end of the world,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
it is the signal. Let's get started on these things. It becomes a lot more difficult conversation when it's okay. Now it's time to give up your own independence
Yeah.
and turn things over. Uh, some of these terms can be put into the actual revocable living trust that allows a transition other than what's in the law. So I guess this is probably just a good time to talk about some of these different capacities. The law and doctors have, here's what it is for you to be, in quote, incompetent, to the point where you can't make contracts and a guardian needs to be assigned to you. All right, that's one threshold.
Okay.
Attorneys have to deal with something called testamentary capacity, which is actually a much higher bar to take away somebody's right to draft their own wills and powers of attorney and things like that. In North Carolina, all they need to know is who they are, who their kids are, and if they have an estate, where do they want their stuff to go. As long as they kind of comprehend that, it doesn't matter that they forgot the neighbor that's been living next door for 5 years and what their
Mm.
name was. They can still execute those documents and name the people they want in charge to handle these things for them. So that's the testamentary capacity. But now, like I was saying, in a revocable trust or any trust, you can put in place, here's what the threshold is for removing them as the trustee. So things like that gentleman who was making trades and his daughter had absolutely no idea and he didn't remember it. Okay, that could trigger something to have the successor trustee come in.
Okay.
And I specifically work with a lot of members where they or their families have Huntington's disease. And there's this kind of phase of Huntington's where someone can become extremely reckless, but they are not incompetent.
Mm.
And so they can absolutely positively believe that they've fallen in love with their neighbor, even after knowing them for 2 days. I want to buy them a car, and they will go ahead and do it. We can have the language in the trust that if this threshold is met, the doctors who are familiar with Huntington's can say, okay, we're at this point taking away your ability to be the trustee of the trust and therefore preserve those types of assets.
But I mean, that's after the fact though, Jeff. So let's just take that example.
Yeah.
I go out and I buy my neighbor a car. Well, the money is
Okay.
spent. I mean, can they get that
Yeah.
back?
Probably not, because
Okay.
they have that capacity to make that contract to purchase the vehicle. but they didn't say, okay, take my life savings and buy my neighbor a house.
Gotcha.
So yeah, you can preserve stuff. You can try to preserve against as much as possible. And one way that you can end up doing that, and this is a big thing for people to give up this autonomy. When we're doing planning to qualify for Medicaid, the simplest plan is set up irrevocable trusts, which require different trustees moving your assets into those irrevocable trusts. And it's like you're walking away from it. And now you're kind of depending on the trustee and the family to get you what you need to do. I don't want to go too deeply into it because Medicaid planning could be a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But you've given up your ability to do things 5 years before you're probably going to end up needing that high skill level of nursing care. But yes, you have given up control. So at that point, well, look, I want to buy my neighbor a car. Mom, Dad, I'm not giving you that money to buy your neighbor a car.
Yeah. So
But
Jeff, I mean,
yeah,
how crucial is it with all of these stories? How crucial is it to start planning with cognitive decline in mind? And then what risks do people run if they don't plan?
well, okay. I recommend planning as early as possible, if only that solid, thorough power of attorney give someone else authority to set up and do things.
Okay.
So even the way we have it structured, even if that's the only thing the clients have done, we have it listed in there that, okay, that child or that power of attorney can set up those irrevocable trusts, take the property and move it into it. It's in their discretion to do that. So it's an emergency failsafe. Obviously, it's a family member. You don't want to take away their autonomy and control until it's necessary, but they can. But again, that's the first step.
And so,
Proper estate planning can cover so many of these potential contingencies before they pop up. Just have it incorporated into a solid plan.
so the contingency, let's speak about that real quick.
Hmm.
Is that one of the contingencies is that the individual is going to need long-term care? How does somebody
Hmm.
access the money in an estate to cover the long-term care if needed?
Okay, if we're talking about those irrevocable Medicaid planning trusts, you've given up all that control. The way we structure the irrevocable trusts, the trustee is actually the beneficiary as long as that person, we'll just say it's a parent, as long as
Okay.
that parent is alive, the child that they put in place as the trustee is the beneficiary, so they can pull money out, put it into their own account, and then turn around and pay for things for mom or dad. This requires an extreme level of trust in that
Yeah.
child, but that's the way that we can section that stuff off. So Medicaid says, yeah, it's not yours. You don't have a right to compel them to give you money, but you know that child's going to do that. So it's out of the parent's hands, and now the trustee can take it out and pay for things at least until you get past that 5 year mark.
And then with the reviews, obviously you want to review this on a regular basis, but let's
Mhm.
just take that example. You go into long-term care, you got the trustee, kid, sister, brother, whatever the case is, they're pulling money because they're allowed to. But
Mhm.
what if they go sideways? What are there any is there anything in place to review the estate plan to make sure that the individual in charge of things is acting in the best interest of those that need the money?
Well, that's the thing. You're really handing somebody a lot of power and authority. There's not much that can be done to remove that person as that trustee, which is again why when we're talking about Medicaid planning, it's not estate planning. This is solidly Medicaid planning. You really have to have enough trust that they're not going to do that. Now, on the professional end, I don't work with the child as my client.
Mhm.
I don't care if mom or dad is even completely incapacitated. It's acknowledged that they are my client. And if I see things that I don't like, then I will step back, step away, and if it's even appropriate, I'll turn the kid in to the state for
Mm.
stealing that money and taking advantage. may or may not do anything, but I always make sure it's the parent who's my client.
Now, Jeff, with that, we we've had a lot of conversations on here, individual groups,
Mhm.
and with other attorneys across the board. And one of the things that I've learned in talking with all of you guys is that not all attorneys are created equal. And so,
Yeah.
how can working with an experienced estate planning attorney ensure that estate plan is effective, not only against cognitive decline, but some other areas that may come into someone's life?
Okay, explain a little bit about what those particular areas are, because
So, because you
you
brought, I
want
mean,
to stick
powers of
specifically.
attorney, trust, irrevocable trust. I mean, you brought up a lot
Right.
of instruments, and each one of those, and I want to dig into those, but I obviously want to be cognizant of your time, and so we want to keep these things short. But I mean, I think each one of those is a conversation in and of itself. And but we see, and I'll be clear with a little bit more clear with the question here, is that we see attorneys that do divorce, immigration,
Yeah.
estate planning, all of the family law, right? And under family law, there's 16 different categories. And so, how important is it to work with an estate planning attorney to ensure that these things are planned effectively?
Oh, absolutely critical. There are a ton of what I call also attorneys. And this is one of those things. It's like you don't really know you're doing something wrong, or at least not as good as you can when it comes to estate planning, because somebody has to die to realize you've messed up things for the last
Yep.
10 years. Okay. I work almost exclusively in estate and Medicaid planning and structuring things to avoid problems down the road, get things sewn up in the front. But one thing I can tell you, even though there may be a ton of attorneys that dabble in the estate planning part, a lot of them, even the estate and probate attorneys, the ones who do a lot of work with probate work,
Mhm.
even they will say, no, 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 I'm not going to try to tackle anything related to Medicaid planning, because that is a whole other area where you do find out if you've made a mistake, because the Medicaid application's getting denied and you're being told by the Medicaid office, here's what this screw up has cost you. And attorneys know, whoa, wait a minute. I really need to know my stuff before I go into that area. So one of the things that I encourage people to look for, if it's at that point you want to look for Medicaid or even VA pension benefit planning that may turn to Medicaid planning, look for someone who is a certified Medicaid planner. That's just a designation that went through a lot of testing and a lot of education, and I went through that. And I kind of joke it was my most difficult test to pass since the bar exam, because for the first time since my sophomore year of high school, I had to do long division without a calculator, and I passed. Okay.
Well done. Well done.
Yep.
I love it. I love it. So, Jeff, look, like I said, there's a lot of things that we could dig into this. How
Mhm.
important is it for you to have communication with other areas of that individual's financial life, like in a CPA or a financial advisor or business attorneys? How important is that?
Oh, look, it's definitely important, and the ideal is that at least once a year, the attorney, the financial advisor, the accountant, and some potentially some other professionals are getting together to talk specifically. Because a lot of times, my clients, if they're just doing estate planning, they're getting called, come in every year, come in every year. It may be 5 or 6 years before they're coming in.
Yeah,
But they may be in contact with the accountant a couple of times a year. They may be in contact with the financial advisor a couple of times a year, and they may be seeing some warning signs. And now suddenly the team has to get together to make sure that we're protecting mom or dad.
I love it. Jeff, look, I really appreciate the time again. Please subscribe, like, comment. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Jeff's website's below. Also, check out his YouTube channel, The Plain English Attorney. Does a tremendous amount of content on all of these topics. You can dig into each one of these specifically. Jeff, thank you so much for your time. Glad you're here. Glad you're part of the network, and look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks for having me, and make it a great day.
You too. Bye now.